My name is Josh Modell. For a very long time, I was editor of the AV Club, and now I am the host and executive editor of Talkhouse. So I do the weekly Talkhouse podcast and also work on some of the other podcasts in the Talkhouse podcast network, among other things. And probably most important to this conversation, I have been for about 6 years working on a feature-length documentary about the frogs.
You've been directing that documentary?
Yes, co-directing with my dear friend Jamie Fleischel.
So cool. Also, quick detour. Tell me a little bit about the Talkhouse and what you guys do on that show.
Oh, sure. Yeah, Talkhouse is a weekly podcast that's been going, I think, 10 years now, that is sort of an unmoderated discussions between creative people. So it's frequently musicians, and it's great.
Nice. So let's get to frogs. I kind of want a timeline of like how the frogs came to be. It started in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where you're based, in 1980. And it took 8 years before they actually made an album. So were they mostly just doing live performances? Can you like set the scene of that like 8 years?
Yeah, I mean, I think, so the frogs are brothers. So you could almost argue that the frogs were really started when Jimmy was born. Dennis and Jimmy Flemion, brothers from Milwaukee, super, super close. And Dennis was huge into music, and therefore Jimmy became huge into music, just listening to music. They're great fans of pop in the 70s, everything from Elton John to Bowie to the Beatles to T-Rex, just voracious appetite for music.
I was dancing when I was 8. It stretched to dance so late.
Dennis always made music, but when Jimmy was about 15, said, Jimmy, we got to get you a guitar. You're going to be great. And a few years after that, they said, okay, we're going to be the Frogs. And they started playing around Milwaukee, and they played punk rock versions of nursery rhymes and stuff. They would do I've Been Working on the Railroad.
I've been working on the railroad. Oh, no. I've been working on the railroad. Just up the point. Oh,
Later did Leonard Cohen covers. So it was kind of covers, and they hadn't really found exactly what they were going to do.
Tell me about those early live performances. Was it just two guys playing with guitars at coffee shops? They were taking a lot of influence from glam rock too, right? What was the live show energy?
Initially, just Dennis playing drums, Jimmy playing guitar, mostly Jimmy singing. At some point in there, and there's no video of this, I wish it existed, they would bring a washing machine on stage and put some tennis shoes or something in it to sort of provide the rhythm. But eventually, they put out a tape called Death Songs, which was some of the earliest songs that Jimmy wrote that are about dragons and death.
I come out at night to ride my dragon.
And Dennis's wife, Janice, created costumes for them, including wings for Jimmy, these huge bat wings. And that was sort of where the glam influence came in. So then there was very sort of amateur pyro going on, like flash pots. People who saw it that I've spoken to were blown away every time, even if there's nobody there, which was the case. Certainly, they didn't tour a ton. They went out to the East Coast a few times before things kind of hit. But yeah, it was very sort of glammed up. Wigs and wings is a good shorthand for it.
You will live in agony down below. You will not die, in other words.
Never really felt accepted by the Milwaukee scene. Always had a sense that they were destined for something bigger, which I guess they were. They started working on their debut album. Sort of contrary to maybe what people think about the Frogs, they took it very seriously. They were kind of trying to create a pop masterpiece.
Laying down my love for you. It's all I've just got to do. Laying down my love for you.
So they spent 2 years making this record, something like 500 hours in the studio. So they had these songs that were written and arranged and very buttoned up.
It is high school, how I remember. It is high school, it's September.
But at the same time, they had rented a 4-track reel-to-reel. And they had it at home. They were using that for things other than what I'm about to tell you, but to sort of blow off steam in a way. they would just improvise songs.
I've done drugs that would blow your mind tonight.
They would record 20 songs in a day. They literally just eventually ended up calling them made-up songs. They're funny and weird and sort of straight from the id, and they would pass those songs around to their friends.
Would you like to come along? I'd like to come along. I've got drugs. Where you going, man? I've got drugs. Can I come wherever it I've is, got man? Drugs. I'll do your dopes. I'll be a dope man.
The vast majority of them are improvised first takes. So there's something like 1,300 of these songs that exist.
Jesus,
these made up songs.
Okay, that's crazy.
Yeah, it's bananas. They put this record out. They eventually, in 1988, they put out the self-titled record. They pressed it themselves. They paid for it themselves.
That's the buttoned up one, right?
The buttoned up one. The self-titled. And it didn't set the world on fire. But at the same time, some tapes of these made up songs had been, going around the sort of underground tape trading network. You have to remember, like, completely pre-internet, like the way that you got these is like someone mailed them to you or a band on tour came through. A guy named Jay Tiller, who was sort of a local Milwaukee legend, he was the first or one of the first of many bass players in the Frogs. And he passed along a tape to his friend Steve Albini, who then passed that tape along to Gerard Cosloy, who at the time was at Homestead Records.
Seen enough to eye you. But I've seen too much to try you.
And Homestead at the time was like the super hip indie label, and like Nick Cave, Dinosaur Jr. Gerard called the Frogs and said, "Oh, I want to put out this record." And they were like, "Great, you want to like re-release the buttoned up record, the self-titled record?" And he's like, "No, I want to put out some of these made up songs. These are amazing." And so that's what became It's Only Right and Natural. Gerard and the band decided that they should take some of the songs that were on a particular theme, which was being gay, and make an album out of that. So that's what became It's Only Right and Natural.
If you're a man, get over here. Women clear out. No doubt about it, men. All right. You love me all night.
So that's good to know. It's like they didn't just write an album about being gay. It was
right
from a larger pool of just songs that were kind of about nothing.
Yeah.
Whatever. They were just thinking about two brothers in a really intimate, blowing off steam. Like, let's just say whatever is on our tongue right now and make up a stupid story.
Exactly.
I'm going to read a little bit from your pitch doc that you sent for the documentary that you're working on. The Frogs released a ridiculously sublime album whose lyrics were largely about the glory and fun of being gay. The twist, neither of the Frogs were actually gay, and in fact, they were brothers. The music scene at the time was in flux, with homophobic hair metal in the process of being destroyed by overly serious grunge and alt-rock. Musicians from the latter camp were particularly susceptible to the unfiltered charms of the Frogs, as it led them to embrace a sense of humor and don't give a shit attitude because they couldn't otherwise. Let's just talk about like the music on it. Like 3 songs off the top of my head that I think of are Hot Annie.
Yep.
Here comes Big Fat George. Look at that butt. Look at him gorge away. All the boys play with his butt.
These are the finest Queen boys I've ever seen.
I'm the first man you've had. Don't tell me about loving women. I don't want to know about it.
Someone's Pinning Me to the Ground. Those are all 3 different song titles.
Yep.
Oh, yeah. Someone's pinning me to the ground.
I guess my pithy review here is like, they're extremely explicit and like extremely stupid, but like that's kind of the point, right? They're super lo-fi. They openly talk about the anatomical realities of gay sex in a way that's not clever or coy, which you would expect from like a musician maybe to like quote that stuff. But like, despite me saying it's stupid, I'm not saying it's not a worthy piece of art. I don't know how you'd pick up the thread from that, but please rescue me.
Well, it's one of the most sort of confusing records of all time because it's everything you just said. It's like, it's so much fun to listen to. Musically, it's very interesting. Clearly these guys are good musicians, but the circumstances under which it was made is two guys in a room, sometimes with their friends there, trying to make each other laugh. So if you think of yourself being in a room with someone that you know intimately, like you're going to say things that you wouldn't otherwise say, and you're not thinking like, oh, the world is going to hear this. But, you know, they shared it with the world and people just loved it.
Richard Dick Richards, you've had your share of heartaches, not with the girls. Oh, they've thrown pearls at your feet, but you're better than the pearls.
You know, where was this stuff coming? Where was like why are these two straight guys from Milwaukee singing about being gay? Like, why is that so funny to them? There's no part of me, having researched this so much, that finds it homophobic, because I sort of know what those guys wanted to be was kind of as punk as you could be. Like, whatever polite society is doing, that's not what we're doing. And in, you know, when they're recording these songs in 87, 88, there is very little gay culture. No one is out. So like the most offensive thing you could be to a jock on the street is like, I'm super gay. Like, oh, you're going to call me gay? Well, I'm going to tell you how gay I am.
Been a month since I had a man, and somehow I give a damn. When I see you eyeing up other guys.
I think it's very difficult for people that are even just a little younger than me, I'm 50, to like wrap their heads around like nobody was gay. It's easy for me to say as like, you know, all these years later as a boring straight guy, like I didn't find it offensive. And I think there was a pretty solid gay fan base that thought it was really great and knew pretty quickly that they weren't actually gay.
You know, I think about like in this podcast, we've talked about bands like MDC or Fear, both of which who were punk bands in the 80s, who did, frankly, like take advantage of homophobia as either a funny point or like a maybe calling out homophobia, but through the lens of someone who's homophobic,
right?
Using slurs or just talking about it in a way that's like disparaging. And then there's, of course, like punk bands who like, you know, we're super like radical and like those people now are super homophobic, like,
right.
And then Ronald Reagan, I just had to say Ronald Reagan in this somewhere because he's always in the background of like the 1980s punk scene.
Yeah. I mean, I think the Frogs were always interested in, including later in their career, like first and foremost, I will say like writing great songs. They wanted to write great songs, but they were interested in sort of exploring the dark side of their own personalities and of culture. And they did it without fear, but also, I'm not telling anyone to not be or to be offended. Like, in my opinion, there was nothing malicious behind it ever. Mm-hmm. And I almost guarantee you, Jimmy will say something to the effect of the Frogs are all about love and mean it. You know, the love between Dennis and Jimmy is remarkable. Those guys like just adored each other in a way that like, I don't know that I don't have, sorry siblings, but I don't have that kind of relationship with my siblings. So it was an incredibly important relationship, and I don't think there was any malicious intent behind it. That said, like when the record came out, there were, you know, gay writers, Jim Farrat particularly, who I have a great deal of respect for, was very upset by It's Only Right Natural and had sort of this public feud with Gerard Cosloy in the letters page of the Village Voice. You know, you shouldn't put this out. It's a gay minstrel show, and, you know, gay people are under enough pressure right now.
There's no chance we'll ever get AIDS. And by the way, I'm a nurse. If you ever want me to come to your aid, I mean, come to your aid.
Gerard, I think in hindsight, you know, has some regrets about, you know, just certain ways it was marketed. But I think, you know, like the way that homosexuality is treated on the record is absurd. You know, as Gerard says, the record is a 37-minute fuck fest. But it sort of comes out, I think, you know, from a place of what is the sort of most controversial thing we can be in 1987, 88? What's going to piss off the jocks, frankly? And it's being gay. And like, not just being gay, but being gayer than any gay thing even though we're not gay. And, you know, they marketed it as the Frogs were gay supremacists out to, you know, end straights. And the Frogs, they jokingly said, stood for founding revolutionaries of gay supremacy. It was sort of meant to be, I think, over the top. But at the same time, like, I don't want to take anything away from the songs, which are great. And Kurt loved those songs. And I think, you know, obviously we'll get to Kurt, but like, I think Kurt clearly, as a person who is on the record as being anti-homophobic, you know, as a feminist, as someone who put in an incesticide or whatever, like, hey, if you're a jock asshole or whatever, don't listen to our records, don't come to our shows. Like, he understood where the Frogs were coming from.
It's almost like the Frogs were trying to be so punk that they pissed off the jocks. They certainly pissed off really conservative Christians who kind of thought that that's just more evidence that rock and roll is the devil's music, you know, that sort of thing.
I mean, as much as I'm almost loath to say the title of the song, like, Homos is a celebration of being gay, written by a sweet man pretending to be gay.
I'm into sports, Mom, and also I'm in the locker room with the boys. I'm in the shower and I drop the soap every time.
I will say, like, I know gay people who have embraced that song. Like, Jimmy came to Milwaukee in early 2023, and at the end of the set in Milwaukee, he's going to play Homos, and he's like, does anybody want to come sing it? And this woman came up who identified herself as a lesbian and sang Homos, and it sounds stupid, but it was a magical moment. It was like just fantastic.
Lesbians are cool and straights are fools. Lesbians rule their scene, but the homos are the coolest of the cool.
I want to also get to when the Frogs did a form of blackface. They had an album in 2000 called Racially Yours, and they were, to their credit, trying to talk about how bad slavery was, and it backfired. But the fact is that I believe it was Dennis who would wear blackface during concerts, and Jimmy, as you noted, would wear whiteface. So it was very much like, you know, they were both caricatures.
If I could, I'd make white black and black white. Every white has his black. Two blacks don't make a white.
I guess just curious, in your perspective, what is the line between representing and uplifting marginalized voices, like being gay or black, right, versus exploiting them for your own gain as an artist? And it's just something we've talked about a lot over the past few years at KEXP. Appreciation versus appropriation. I'll park it there. What's the line?
Man, it's funny because, like, I think, you know, I'm trying to picture the appreciation versus appropriation line, and I feel like the Frogs are like in an entirely different county. Like they're not in that conversation. Jimmy and Dennis, and they're mostly Jimmy's songs, you know, had read a bunch of books about slavery and racism throughout history, and as they say eloquently at the time, because they did explain Racially Yours a little bit, like, the black man wins on the record. The white man is stupid on the record.
All this noise and no one listens.
The way that they get there is going to be hurtful to some people, especially in 2024. But the intention behind that record was completely pure.
Revolution. Revolution.
Dennis stopped wearing blackface eventually. Like, I think he understood that it was a button-pushing thing, but also his intention was to be so over the top as to call attention to something that was an ill of society, which I honestly believe was important to him.
There's also that 2012 song. It's called Pull a Kurt, which is a song about suicide.
Can't seem to get my mind together. I'm gonna pull a Kurt, and the weather be damned.
I feel like I'm making you their lawyer. You don't have to be their lawyer.
Oh, no, yeah. Well, it's funny because I feel like their lawyer a little bit in making this documentary, but I feel like I'm the prosecution and the defense. And I want to understand where they were coming from. And I've told people before, if this was, racist homophobes, I wouldn't be interested in making a movie about them at all. And do I think like everything they did was completely pure and coming from 100% the right place? No, but I mean, it's not for anybody, right? But I do think their hearts were in the right place. And nobody did what they did.
That's a great segue into just talking about the way they inspired a lot of musicians now. I mean, I think about Dan Deacon's performances are pretty like showy in a way that Frogs were. Of Montreal, certainly in their performance, their music, their personas.
Let's have bizarre celebrations. Let's forget who forget, why forget where.
Even on a hyper-local level, like growing up in Phoenix, there's a band called Treasure Mammal. Very similar, sort of like super glitzy, like people crawling all over each other, a live show singing about a song called Bromance that Treasure Mammal has that's very much in the same vein of the Frogs.
Oh, nice.
Romance, a little broke back, some of your love that I can get behind.
So just on Kurt Cobain himself, of course, like they're running on parallel tracks, right? Because Kurt has the line, God is gay.
Yeah.
Just kind of stuff like that feels like, oh, that's random and possibly offensive. There's two other big things I'm thinking of. One is the now infamous videotape toy porno that Nirvana had on repeat in their tour bus.
Right.
And then also just Kurt's Montage of Heck home recordings, which makes me think of the Frogs because of the lo-fi quality and just kind of like the weird, like beans. What is beans,
Beans, Jesse ate some beans. He was happy that he ate some beans.
We know for sure how much Kurt loved a lot of naive music like that. And I also think Kurt loved the Frogs because he loved the songs, and he was a dude who loved the Beatles and loved melody. And there's so much of that on the first Frogs record. When they met, or they only met once, the Frogs and Kurt, Dennis brought him a copy of the first record, the self-titled record, which at the time you could never, like they were all in the Frogs' basement. You couldn't find them anywhere. And Kurt was like over the moon. He's like, I've been looking for that forever. And he's like, Dennis was like, you mean It's Only Right Natural? He's no, the first record. And Dennis was so impressed that Kurt even knew that the first record existed. But supposedly they played It's Only Right Natural over the PA every night before Nirvana played. And I don't know if this is an apocryphal story or not, but supposedly someone lost the It's Only Right Natural tape, and Kurt was like, we're not playing until somebody goes and gets the record, takes it home on vinyl because it wasn't available on cassette, records it onto a cassette, brings it here so everybody can hear that before we go on.
That's fascinating. That's an interesting.
And yeah, so to Toy Porno. So Toy Porno is like a compilation that Dennis made of sort of these home animations he had made, like slightly more sophisticated ones, a lot of like Frogs live stuff, and where it gets its name was sort of these videos that those guys made in their backyard, just with like a shitty early camcorder, and they would have, their little action figures kind of just talking to each other like kids would. And not inevitably, but in most of the scenarios, there was the toys would end up making sweet love, I guess we could say.
I don't feel good.
Get the bed or else light the fire. I'm gonna sleep.
I feel like I'm never coming on another camping trip. I don't care what you say.
I guess that does kind of lead me to the unfortunate thing. 2012, Dennis passed away. One of the two brothers of the Frogs passed away.
Yeah, Dennis was like, it comes as a surprise, I think, to some Frogs fans, but like a total family man.
Yeah.
Doted on his kids. He had two kids, Paul and Sarah, and his lovely wife, Janice. So yeah, the family, like a large group, went out on 2 boats on Wind Lake, and Dennis jumped in. He was a strong swimmer and didn't come up.
Yeah.
And just a total freak accident. He never drank alcohol. He never did drugs. Neither of them did. Just shit luck and a huge loss, I think.
Car crash blues, arriving dead in the morgue in the nude. Cold morning hours. Oh, I didn't wear my best clothes to my death.
course, there was a big tribute to Dennis after he passed away. And one of those is Pearl Jam writing the song Future Days.
If I ever were to lose you, I'd surely lose myself.
I don't know that it's specifically about Dennis, although there are references to Dennis in that song. The lyric, all the missing crooked hearts, they may die, but in us they live on.
All the missing crooked hearts, they may die, but in us they live on.
And he's referencing these crooked hearts that Dennis used to draw.
That's really sweet, actually.
Dennis found Eddie's notebook, his lyric notebook, backstage at one of these shows in Milwaukee that the Frogs opened for, and wrote him a note that was partly composed of lyrics from a Frog song and partly just, I said, miss you already. There's a song that Vedder has said, I'm sure he has probably said this about a few songs in his life, but that he covered a few times, called The Longing Goes Away, that he said, oh, this is, one of the most beautiful songs ever written, this Frog song.
I'm sleeping less and less each night. Hello, hello, hello. They say it gets easier. The longing goes away.
Smashing Pumpkins was another band that took a shine to the Frogs. And after Dennis's death, tell me about the song 25 Surprise. Do you know anything about that?
Well, it's funny because I've never heard 25 Surprise. So he played it. Billy Corgan wrote the song that I believe is called 25 Surprise. That is a tribute to Dennis. And I think he only played it at the funeral, which I did not go to, and then at Dennis's house after the funeral. There was like a gathering. Sarah Flemion, Dennis's daughter, told us, what a lovely song it was. Jimmy, told us what a lovely song it was. But I guess he's just chosen to kind of keep that one close to his heart. It's kind of lore in Smashing Pumpkins chat rooms and stuff. Do chat rooms still exist? I'm dating myself.
Yeah, I was there.
Yeah, so that song exists, but I don't know the status of it. Maybe once this movie comes out, we can convince Billy to record it properly and put it out.
I just think what's so cool about the story of the Frogs is they were these two really unassuming brothers who, I don't know, they didn't really make it in like the big way, but they also caught the attention of so many of these household names in grunge and stuff. And like, it's all one big ecosystem. Like, you can't be pretentious, like Pearl Jam was only band that ever wrote good music, and then say like the Frogs are trash. And then it's like, no, Pearl Jam was directly inspired. And obviously this goes to Nirvana and Smashing Pumpkins and many other bands that we've talked about. It's funny because I was going to ask this question to you as, what is the purpose of this art? But I think I've just answered it in my own way. In some ways, that like, what is it doing for both a local music scene, like in Wisconsin, or just people in the community? Like, when they hear this music, like, what does it do? Despite all the controversy, despite whatever, blah, 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 like, what does this music do for a community?
It's funny because I think song to song, like Frogs music can do so many different things. Like, this is the same band doing Grandma Sitting in the Corner with a Penis in Her Hand going, no, 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 which is a perfectly legitimate Frog song.
Grandma in the corner with a penis in her hand going, no, no, no.
And then, Jimmy doing The Longing Goes Away, which is like this absolutely like gutting, beautiful love song. And then in the middle, you have like an anti-slavery song sung from the perspective of an enslaved person, which is like, oh, now you're doing that. And then, we didn't even get into like their sort of major label debut. There's a song on it called Raped that sounds on the surface like a celebration of rape.
Everyone's making a big deal out of the fact that I raped someone. What's the crime? I had fun.
For the documentary, we have a bunch of audio of Dennis. He's so funny about that. He's just like, of course we're anti-rape. And then he starts making up an anti-rape song on the spot. And he's like, nobody wants to hear that. Like, it's obvious. Like, of course we're anti-rape.
And the priest wanted to watch.
On the surface, the Frogs seem like, oh, this is kind of like this novelty band with these goofy songs. And they sung songs about being gay, but they weren't actually gay. But that's like the tip of the iceberg. And it's the weirdest fucking iceberg you've ever seen once you get down there. And lovely and sweet and touching. And, like Jamie and I, my co-director, like the deeper we got into it, it just kept going to like, this is like a love story between these two brothers who were making the music they wanted to make. They thought they should be as big as Pearl Jam or Smashing Pumpkins. They thought they were worthy of that. I think they also would never change a note to try and make that happen. Never do anything that kind of went against what their instincts were.
It almost feels like the Frogs have the opposite story of Nirvana in the way that you just said, like the Frogs were trying to be famous and by all accounts, they really should have been. But Nirvana was not really necessarily trying. I mean, whatever, you could debate that, I guess. But like, you could argue that Kurt was not looking to make it super big. They were just doing their weird shit. And then they did get picked up and Smells Like Teen Spirit and, they blew up and we all know how that story ended.
And they embraced it to a degree, right? And I think, and they rejected it to a degree. Nirvana, I'm talking about. The Frogs never got a chance to embrace it or reject it. Their sort of sole chance to really make it was this Billy Corgan produced EP that was put out on like a subsidiary of Mercury Records, and they put the song "Raped" on there, and because why wouldn't we? That's who we are. So they could have made some concessions, and I think Nirvana probably made a few concessions.
Yeah, sure.
It's confounding, like in a way that the Frogs were, and that like I can't think of another band like the Frogs, still before or since. I mean, there's like little bits and pieces. Oh, they're doing, they're kind of. There's a little bit of T-Rex here, but it's like the big picture. There's nothing like it. Yeah. Which, to pay tribute to your podcast, is clearly why Kurt Cobain loved It's Only Right and Natural and the rest of the Frogs catalog. You saw his guitar pedal that's in the Hall of Fame now, right? Somebody sold one of Kurt's guitar pedals like a year and a half, 2 years ago for some ridiculous price, of course, like 75 grand or something. And it was on this auction site and I was just looking at it out of curiosity and there were pictures from all angles and then like, oh, the bottom of the guitar pedal is It's Only Right and Natural sticker.
That's awesome.
So Jamie and I are like, oh, the Frogs are in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame now because the guy who bought it has loaned it to the Hall of Fame and my understanding is that it's there now.
That's so funny.
So the Frogs are in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
One way or another. And I feel like it's fitting for them to be there on a sticker, Just, I don't know.
And on the bottom of a pedal, hiding.
It's like gum on the bottom of a shoe of music. That's pretty great.
Yeah, it's a beautiful night. Making love to every guy inside.
This has been really great, Josh. Thank you for your time.
Oh my gosh, of course, yeah. And I'm loving all the episodes of the podcast that I've listened to so far.
A night